The words came out of her mouth with the dry, rehearsed precision of an instruction manual. Cynthia Albright, our chief financial officer, did not look up from her leather binder when she delivered the blow. She spoke about budget alignments, resource adjust, and strategic resource allocation, terms designed to make cold decisions sound like natural laws. She announced that bonuses would be distributed across the leadership team, with one exception. The glass boardroom went dead silent. No one moved. No one clicked a pen or cleared their throat. We were suspended in that high-floor silence, looking out over the city skyline while the red digital clock on the wall behind Cynthia ticked to 4:12 in the afternoon. I remember the exact time because that clock was the only thing moving in the room. Bright red numbers, impossible to ignore, telling me that 19 years of my life had just been reduced to a minor budget adjustment. Cynthia closed her binder with a soft click. She looked across the table, her eyes scanning the room, pausing briefly on everyone except me. I was the only senior director of operations at the table, and I was the only one who did not have a document with a bold number printed next to my name. My sheet had a blank space. It was not a zero. A zero would have been an invitation to argue, a number to contest, a figure that indicated someone had actually calculated my worth and come up with nothing. A blank space was far worse. It meant I had been completely erased from the equation before the meeting even started. My name is Lawrence Vance, and I was 48 years old. I had spent 19 years of my life inside this company, starting back when the floors were carpeted in cheap gray tile and the systems were held together by luck, caffeine, and my own late nights. I was the one who built the operational framework that allowed us to scale from a small regional player to a national provider. And this quarter, the company had just posted the highest revenue in its history. It was a record quarter, the kind of achievement that gets celebrated with company-wide emails, expensive dinners, and congratulatory calls from the chief executive officer. And yet, I was the sole person excluded from the reward. To my left sat Bradley Thornton. He adjusted his heavy gold watch, his face a mask of polite indifference. Bradley was in his late 30s, wore custom-tailored shirts with stiff collars, and had joined the company 6 months ago as a strategic hire. He did not look at me. He had spent the last half-year learning my systems, asking detailed questions under the guise of onboarding, and now he sat at the same table I had spent 2 decades reaching, holding a bonus sheet that no doubt carried a very comfortable number. Across from me, 2 vice presidents shifted their weight in their leather chairs, looking down at their papers like they were suddenly very interested in the page margins and font choices. Silence in a corporate boardroom is not just quiet, it is agreement. By saying nothing, every person in that room was signing off on my erasure. They knew my work. They knew that the entire customer database, the billing pipelines, and the delivery systems only ran because I spent my weekends auditing the logs. But in rooms like that, challenging the chief financial officer over a budget decision is a risk no one is willing to take. I did not raise my hand. I did not ask for clarification. I had spent enough years in the corporate world to know that once a decision like this is read aloud in a glass room, the negotiation is already over. The execution has already happened, and all that remains is the cleanup. I stayed seated for a few seconds after the meeting broke. I watched them gather their laptops, their voices returning in low, hushed tones as they walked out the door, discussing dinner plans and weekend tea times. No one met my eye. I stood up, folded my single sheet of paper in half, and walked back to my office. I was not angry. Anger is loud and chaotic. What I felt was a cold, sharp clarity that settled deep in my chest. 19 years ago, I was 29 years old when I walked through these doors. I was full of energy, willing to work 36 hours, straight to fix a database crash, because I believed I was part of a family. I remember year 7, when our largest client threatened to walk away because of a major system glitch. I lived in the server room for 2 days, drinking stale coffee, tracing thousands of lines of undocumented code until I found the logic error. I fixed it. The client stayed, and my manager gave me a brief nod of approval before moving to the next fire. That became my life. I became the guy who prevented the disasters. Over the years, I built a quiet, comfortable life on that stability. My house was almost paid off, requiring only a few more years of steady payments. My daughter, Chloe Vance, was preparing for her first year of university. She was a smart, focused kid, and I had promised her that she would not have to worry about student loans or part-time jobs. I had promised her that I would handle the tuition, no matter what. I had stayed at this company because I valued that predictability above all else. I had turned down headhunters and rival offers over the years because I believed in the unwritten contract of loyalty. You build the foundation, you keep the systems running, and they take care of you. But as I sat at my desk, looking out the window at the parking lot, I realized that the unwritten contract was a lie. The blank space on my bonus sheet was the only reality that mattered. They knew exactly how much work I did, and they knew they could not run the system without me. They just believed they had already bought my silence and my compliance. They thought 19 years of history meant I had nowhere else to go. They thought my loyalty was a cage, and that I was too old to fly. The shift did not happen overnight, but it escalated the moment Bradley Thornton was hired. He was introduced as a strategic leader, a title that meant he was responsible for outcomes, but insulated from the actual work required to achieve them. He had a vocabulary full of modern corporate jargon, talking about synergy, paradigm shifts, and operational alignment. To the executives, he sounded like the future. To me, he sounded like a man who had never had to rebuild a corrupted database at 3 in the morning or manually patch a security hole, while the production servers were screaming under load. At first, I tried to work with him. During his second week, we sat in a planning session for a major new client transition. The timeline Bradley had proposed was dangerously short. He had promised the client a transition period of 30 days, ignoring the physical limitations of our data transfer pipelines and the scheduled maintenance windows. I tried to explain the bottleneck. I laid out the bandwidth constraints, the validation checks required by law, and the risk of data corruption if we rushed the process. I even showed him the historical logs from similar transitions. Bradley listened, smiling politely, nodding at all the right moments. When I finished, he turned to the rest of the room, completely bypassing my analysis. "What Lawrence is pointing out," Bradley said, "is that we need to optimize our deployment protocols to meet our strategic targets. We will proceed with the 30-day timeline, but we will run parallel validation streams to mitigate the risk." The room nodded in approval. He had taken my warning, rephrased it in a way that sounded proactive, and ignored the core technical reality. I did not argue. In those rooms, arguing makes you look defensive, and Bradley was very good at making technical caution look like personal hesitation. A month later, we faced another system integration. I pointed out a critical security vulnerability in the API connections Bradley wanted to use. Bradley leaned back, tapped his pen against his chin, and dismissed it with a wave of his hand. "I think we are getting too deep in the weeds here, Lawrence," Bradley said. "We need to focus on the high-level delivery. We cannot let minor operational details stall our momentum." The weeds were where the system lived. The weeds were where the clients paid us to be. But the executives in the room did not want to hear about the weeds. They wanted to hear about momentum. They wanted to see slides with upward arrows. So I let it go. I did not press the issue. I did not write long emails explaining why he was wrong. I simply documented my findings in the standard project log, marked them as completed reviews, and went back to my office. That was the week I decided to change how I worked. For 19 years, my job description had been a starting point. I had routinely worked 10 hours a week overtime without reporting it. I had anticipated failures and quietly corrected them before they could trigger an alert. If a system update was scheduled for a Saturday, I was online, monitoring the progress, stepping in to fix errors before the client support teams even logged in. I stopped doing all of it. I did not stop doing my job. I did my job with absolute, rigorous precision. I arrived at 8 in the morning and left at 5 in the afternoon. If a system failed at 5:05 and I was not the designated on-call engineer, I did not open my laptop. I let the automated alert route to the designated team. I became a ghost in the machine, doing exactly what was written on my employment contract, and not a single keystroke more. The first test of this new boundary came on a Thursday night. At 11:43, my phone buzzed with a priority alert. A data sync pipeline had stalled. In the past, I would have been logged in within 5 minutes, writing a custom script to clear the queue and restart the sync. I knew exactly why it had stalled. A minor configuration change Bradley had authorized earlier that day had created a loop. Instead of logging in, I opened the ticketing system on my phone. I wrote a detailed, professional note describing the issue, referenced the configuration change that caused it, and assigned the ticket to the on-call support queue. It took me 3 minutes. Then, I put my phone on my nightstand and went back to sleep. The next morning, the office was in a quiet panic. The stalled pipeline had delayed the morning reports for 3 major accounts. Bradley was pacing the hallway outside my office, his face tight and his tie slightly askew. "Lawrence, did you see the alert last night?" he asked, stepping into my office without knocking. "I did," I said, looking up from my screen. I logged the details and assigned it to the on-call team at 11:46. "Yeah, but they did not know how to fix it," Bradley said, his voice rising slightly in frustration. "The reports were 4 hours late. We had to explain the delay to the clients." I pointed to the ticketing system on my monitor. "The solution is documented in the system manual under pipeline recovery," I said calmly. "The on-call team has access to that folder." Bradley stared at me, looking for a sign of malice or anger. He found nothing. I was polite, professional, and entirely within my rights. I had followed the protocol to the letter. I had not broken any rules. I had simply stopped being the safety net that caught his mistakes, and he was beginning to realize how high the fall could be. By the second week of my new routine, the friction in our operations was becoming impossible to hide. A system that had run smoothly for years was suddenly showing signs of strain. The reason was simple. A complex machine requires constant maintenance, and the person who had been doing that maintenance in the background was now doing exactly what his contract required. No more, no less. Without my quiet interventions, small bugs began to compound. Complaints began to trickle in. A report was missing a data point. A client portal was slow to load on Tuesday mornings. An automated invoice run failed to send on the first of the month. None of these were catastrophic events on their own, but together they created a steady hum of dissatisfaction that reached the executive suite. In the weekly leadership meeting, Bradley tried to frame these issues as temporary adjustments. "We are optimizing our delivery model," he explained to Cynthia and the other executives. "We are identifying legacy bottlenecks and updating our protocols to match modern standards." Cynthia nodded, but her expression was less warm than it had been a month ago. She looked at the reports, then looked across the table at me. "Lawrence, you have managed these pipelines for a long time," she said. "What is your assessment of the recent delays?" I kept my hands folded on the table, maintaining a calm, neutral posture. "The systems are operating within their defined parameters," I said. "We have experienced some configuration conflicts due to recent updates, but the teams are logging the issues according to standard procedure." I did not point fingers. I did not mention Bradley by name. I had no reason to speak. The data spoke for itself, and more importantly, I was no longer offering to fix it. In the past, I would have stood up, walked to the whiteboard, and laid out a 3-step plan to stabilize the system. Now, I simply answered the question that was asked and remained silent. 2 days later, my phone rang while I was sitting in my car during lunch. The caller was Harvey Mercer. Harvey was a director of engineering at one of our primary competitors, a larger, faster-growing firm that had been trying to expand its market share. We had known each other for a decade, occasionally sharing technical insights at industry conferences. "Lawrence, I heard you might be open to a change," Harvey said without preamble. I took a slow breath. "I am listening, Harvey." "We are building out a new operations division," he said. "We need someone who knows how to design large-scale database systems from the ground up, not just keep them running. We want someone who can set the technical direction for the next 10 years. We have been watching your systems from afar, and we know you are the architect behind their success." We talked for 45 minutes. Harvey did not talk about alignment or strategic synergies. He talked about technical architecture, database schemas, latency targets, and infrastructure budgets. He spoke my language, the language of builders, not talkers. And then, he discussed the compensation. The base salary he offered was double my current pay. With the guaranteed performance bonuses and equity options, the total compensation package was nearly 3 times what I was making. It is not just about the money, Lawrence, Harvey added. We want you to have full authority over the team and the technology. You report directly to me, and I report to the chief operating officer. No layers of middle managers who do not know the difference between an index and a table. I will need to see the written offer, I said. You will have it in your inbox tomorrow morning, Harvey replied. The offer arrived on Tuesday at 9:18 in the morning. I opened it at my desk. The door to my office closed. I read the document 3 times. The terms were exactly as Harvey had described. No hidden clauses, no vague promises. It was a formal, binding commitment to value my experience at its true market rate. I looked at the signature line. Then, I looked at the red clock on my office wall. I thought about the 19 years I had given to this company, the nights I had spent on cold server room floors, the milestones I had missed, and the blank space on that bonus sheet. The fear of leaving my comfort zone evaporated, replaced by a deep sense of validation. I opened a blank document on my computer. I typed my resignation letter. It was 3 sentences long. I stated my final date, which was 2 weeks from that day, offered to provide a transition plan for my outstanding tasks, and thanked them for the opportunity. I did not feel excitement or anxiety. I felt the profound peace of a man who has finally stepped out of a bad bargain and is ready to walk into the light. I sent the resignation email on Wednesday morning at 8:07. I copied my manager, Cynthia Albright, and the head of human resources. By 8:19, my manager was standing in my office. He did not sit down. He held a copy of my email in his hand like it was a physical threat. "Lawrence, what is this?" he asked. "Is this some kind of negotiation tactic?" "No," I said, looking up from my screen. "It is my 2-week notice." "You cannot just leave," he said, his voice strained. "We are in the middle of 3 major client rollouts. The teams depend on you. The entire infrastructure depends on you." "The teams have access to all the documentation," I replied. "I have spent the last 5 years ensuring our standard operating procedures are written down and updated." "It is not just about the manuals, Lawrence," he said, his tone softening slightly, turning from anger to pleading. "You know how these systems work in practice. Bradley is still onboarding. We cannot lose you right now. Is this about the bonus? Because if it is, we can talk to Cynthia. We can find a way to make this right. We can match whatever they are offering." "The time to talk to Cynthia was last week," I said. "The decision is made. I have accepted another offer." He stood there for another minute, realized I was not going to negotiate, and walked out. An hour later, I was called into a meeting with my manager and Bradley. The meeting was 45 minutes of quiet desperation. Bradley, for all his confidence in front of the VPs, looked pale. He had realized that the technical safety net he had been relying on was about to disappear, leaving him fully exposed. "Lawrence, we need to structure a comprehensive transition plan," Bradley said. "We need to make sure we document all your daily tasks and the tribal knowledge you possess." "Everything I do daily is already documented in the team wiki," I said. "I will spend my remaining 2 weeks updating the logs for the active projects." "But what about the integration scripts?" Bradley asked. "The ones you run for the weekly updates. Those are automated cron jobs," I explained. "They run on the schedule. If they fail, the error codes are sent to the support channel." "Yes, but who fixes them if they fail?" Bradley pressed. "The on-call engineer," I said. "The troubleshooting guide is attached to the alerts." He did not have an answer for that. He knew, and I knew, that the troubleshooting guide was only useful if the person reading it had a basic understanding of the database structure. Bradley did not, and the junior engineers he had hired to replace the experienced staff I had trained were not ready to handle a major system failure. During my final week, the company experienced its first major escalation. A critical data export for our largest retail client failed on a Wednesday night. The failure was caused by a database lock issue that occurred when 2 automated processes ran at the same time. It was a known issue, one I had spent years resolving manually by adjusting the runtimes whenever the database volume grew. At 9:30 on Thursday morning, my manager and Bradley walked into my office. "Lawrence, we need you to jump on a call with the client," my manager said. "They are threatening a contract penalty. The database is locked and we cannot get the export to run." I looked at the calendar on my wall. I had 2 days left in my notice period. I am currently finalizing the transition documentation for the operations team, I said. I have logged my notes on the database lock issue and the active ticket. The resolution steps are detailed in Section 4 of the database runbook. Lawrence. The client is on the phone right now, Bradley said, his voice cracking slightly. They do not want to hear about runbooks. They want the data. I understand, I said, but my priority is ensuring a clean transition. If I stop to resolve this issue, the documentation will not be completed before my departure. The support team is fully authorized to execute the steps in the runbook. They did not leave. They stood there, waiting for me to yield, waiting for 19 years of habit to kick in. They expected me to sigh, open my laptop, and fix their problem. I did not move. I simply looked back at my monitor and continued typing my final report. After a long, heavy silence, my manager turned and walked out. Bradley followed him. It took them another 6 hours to resolve the issue, and the client filed a formal complaint demanding a credit for the delayed service. My final day was quiet. There was no cake, no card, no farewell speech. I packed my desk into a single cardboard box, handed my laptop and badge to the human resources representative, and walked out of the building at 4:30. As I walked to my car, I did not look back. I had given 19 years of my life to that building, and all I was carrying out was a single box. But as I started the engine, I felt lighter than I had in a very long time, ready for the next chapter. My first week at my new company was a revelation. I was given a spacious office, a new laptop, and an engineering team that actually understood the systems they were building. Harvey Mercer welcomed me on my first morning, and we spent the day mapping out the architecture for the new database cluster. There were no strategic alignments to discuss, only throughput, latency, and scalability. My first paycheck arrived at the end of the month. When I logged into the payroll portal and saw the net figure, I had to stop and look at it for a long time. It was nearly 3 times what I had been earning. It was a tangible, undeniable proof of my value, written in numbers that could not be erased by a budget alignment. However, my old company was not finished with me. 3 weeks into my new role, a certified letter arrived at my home. It was from the legal department of my former employer. The letter was a formal cease and desist notice. It claimed that by taking a position with a direct competitor, I was in violation of the non-compete clause in my employment contract. It also accused me of misappropriating proprietary operational processes, threatening immediate injunctive relief and damages if I did not resign from my new position. I sat at my kitchen table reading the letter. For a moment, the old anxiety crept back. They were a multi-million-dollar corporation with a team of lawyers. I was a single engineer. But then, I remembered that I was no longer the man who accepted the blank space. I hired a sharp employment attorney named Walter Vance. Despite sharing my last name, he was not a relative, just a professional who came highly recommended. Walter reviewed my old employment contract, my new offer letter, and the cease and desist notice. He smiled when he finished reading. "This is a classic scare tactic," Walter said, leaning back in his chair. "They are trying to bully you because they are panicking. Let us look at the legal realities. First," Walter explained, "my old employment contract was governed by California law, as the corporate headquarters was registered there. Under California Business and Professions Code Section 16,600, any contract that restrains anyone from engaging in a lawful profession, trade, or business of any kind is void. California has a strict public policy against non-compete agreements. Furthermore," Walter continued, "they have accused you of misappropriating proprietary operational processes, but they have provided no evidence. You did not download any database schemas, copy any code, or take any client lists. The knowledge in your head is your experience, not their intellectual property." "But we are not just going to defend," Walter said, his eyes bright with professional enthusiasm. "We are going to counterattack." Walter pointed out that under my old employment agreement, my bonus was tied to a performance metric framework. The agreement stated that if the operational metrics met the green targets, the bonus would be paid according to the scheduled rates. I had copies of my performance reviews showing all green metrics for the final 3 quarters of my employment under California Labor Code Section 200. Wages are defined to include all amounts for labor performed, including bonuses. By withholding my contractually earned bonus based on an arbitrary budget alignment, the company had committed wage theft. We drafted a response. It was not a polite request. It was a legal broadside. We informed them that their non-compete agreement was completely void under California Business and Professions Code Section 16,600. We stated that any attempt to enforce it would be met with a lawsuit for tortious interference and statutory penalties. And then, we filed a formal counterclaim for my unpaid bonus. We demanded the full bonus amount of $45,000, plus interest, statutory penalties for unpaid wages, and all attorney fees, citing California Labor Code Section 200 in consecutive sections. The response from my old company was silence. For 2 weeks, we heard nothing. Then, a week before the court filing deadline, their external counsel contacted Walter. They wanted to settle. They offered to pay the full $45,000 bonus if I agreed to sign a mutual release and non-disclosure agreement. We refused. Walter countered, demanding the bonus, the maximum statutory penalties for the delay, and $10,000 to cover my legal fees. He also specified that the settlement would not include any restriction on my employment. 3 days later, they accepted. The settlement check arrived in Walter's office a week later. The total amount was $58,000. After paying Walter his fee, I had enough to pay off the remaining balance on my mortgage and cover Chloe's first 2 years of university tuition. I never heard from my old company again. Occasionally I hear updates from former colleagues. The transition had been a disaster. Without my quiet interventions, the system integration Bradley managed had suffered 3 major outages. The retail client they had fought to keep had terminated their contract, citing operational instability. Bradley was eventually reassigned to a non-operational role where he could manage slides without touching the systems. I did not celebrate their struggle. I did not feel a sense of triumph. I simply felt the quiet satisfaction of a man who had drawn a line and watched the world adjust to it. Loyalty is a fine thing, but it must be a two-way street. When a company shows you that your work is worth nothing more than a blank space, the only logical response is to take your tools and walk. The system will always find a way to replace you, but they will also find out exactly what it costs to do so. And sometimes the best revenge is simply letting them pay the full price.